Hello, everyone, and thank you all for signing up and attending today. We are set to welcome over 150 attendees to this event on race and sport, and we are very much appreciative of your time during a summer that has again shown how vitally important this subject is. My name is Greg Johnson. I'm head of regional sport for Reach PLC, and today we'll be chairing the discussion with our brilliant panelists, Anyika Onuora and Gurmej Singh Pawar. So please allow me to introduce them both to you properly. Anyika Onuora is a former Olympian who won bronze at Rio 2016 and has also won medals in the relay as an individual sprinter in the World and European Championships. Anyika is the host of Hidden Greatness podcast, which is all about how talented people can use their subconsciousness to find success, and is releasing her autobiography, My Hidden Race, in March 2022 through Reach Sport. Anyika is also ambassador for Malaria No More UK and a columnist for Reach's Olympic newsletter, The Torch, which is running throughout the summer's Olympic Games on the Mirror and all other titles. Hello, Anyika, and welcome to the panel.
Hi, Greg. Great to be here.
Well, thank you for coming. How are you today?
Great, good. Thanks. Good, all good.
Cracking. And of course, we have Gurmej Singh Pawar as well, who is CEO of Medj Media and chairman of hockey club Barford Tigers. He is co-founder of Hockey All In, a group that works to address racism, elitism, and promote diversity and inclusion in hockey. In 2020, Gurmej prompted England Hockey to review access and talent identification in hockey as a sport after going public about issues of race and class in hockey, which he identified as having lost touch with modern-day Britain. He is also host of the podcast COVID, Opportunity and Isolation. Welcome, Gurmej. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me on here, Greg.
Well, thank you for coming. And lastly, a little bit about Reach PLC. We are the largest digital publisher in the UK for news and sport, with national titles such as The Mirror and regional titles such as Manchester Evening News, Liverpool ECHO, Newcastle Chronicle, Wales Online, and Football.London, to name a few. This event was organised by Reach Culture, who are part of the company's diversity and inclusion networks. That cover LGBT+, social mobility, access and disability, and so much more. Reach Culture is the diversity and inclusion network on race and ethnicity, and we are working hard to ensure Reach PLC and the wider media landscape is more representative of the country as a whole, both in terms of our coverage, recruitment, and so much more. So anyway, enough about who we are, and on to the point of today's panel. If at any point you do have questions throughout the event, please do drop a question in the comments. We'll do our very best to answer as many as possible at the end in the Q&A section of the event. So, first question in our panel discussion. Before the Olympics even started, there was already lots of incidents related to race, and there's been a few that have happened during the games as well. So, we had the banning of swimming caps for afro hair before the games. A number of black female runners appeared to be disproportionately affected around disqualifications for physiological reasons. There was a German cycling coach who was sent home for racist abuse. And Olympic official broadcasters initially banned images of athletes taking the knee, only to U-turn after pressure on the decision. Kind of left a few questions for some people saying, is the Olympics itself racist? So what are your thoughts on that, Anyika?
Oh, that's a long list. Unfortunately, it is a long list. Do you know what? There are definitely levels of discrimination. It's kind of unfortunate that a lot of this has had to unravel that over the past couple of weeks, couple of months. You know, a lot of things have been happening over the past year or so, especially within my sport. For example, with the DSD athletes, Casa Semenya taking her case to CAS. It's just discrimination one after the other. And then to add to that, the ongoing racism that we actually have in the sport that people don't want to always address, because honestly, it does make a lot of people feel extremely uncomfortable. I don't think that some people are ready to have this conversation, but I believe that the good thing that's happening what's been happening over the past year is that people are being much more open. And we do need more allies. It shouldn't be on the black athletes to have these, discussions. It should literally be on white people as well. Because you're not necessarily the ones who are being discriminated on a daily basis. And I'm glad mostly that people are starting to see it now. Because even outside of the Olympics and the ongoing racism that the athletes have to encounter, you've also got everyone also saw how things unfolded at the Euro final in Wembley, which was an unfortunate incident. But yeah, it's definitely disappointing. But the good thing is we are having this open discussion. So yeah, let's start somewhere.
No, absolutely. I think Gurmej, I guess in the hockey world, this is something that you focused on last year when you kind of called out England hockey on the issues you've noticed and recognised. Obviously, there's been actually a lot of focus on diversity in hockey in the Team GB team at the Olympics this year. What are your kind of thoughts on the Olympics itself and some of the issues raised there?
Yeah, I think first of all, mentioning the diversity in the Olympics and the GB team, I'd say definitely with the women. I mean, I'm really proud of what the women have done and over the last year or so to try and educate themselves, and they've gone out of their way, independently to do that. And I was really proud of them to see that they did take the knee at the Olympics. And then when we look at some of the things that have happened around the Olympics, you've got Alice Deering, who has a certain genetic trait, and her hair grows in a certain way, which is shared by many women around the world. And she chose not to wear a traditional swim cap and had one made for her that fit her better. And she was told that it didn't fit the natural form of the head. Now, I'm kind of wondering how they came up with that that theory that that this cap shouldn't be allowed in the Olympics. I mean, is there some science behind it? Because I think it was very ambiguous, and I think it just left more questions than anything. And then you've got the German cycling coach who's referred to the Eritrean and Algerians as, I think it was, camel drivers. And again, it's some of the ingrained views of some in Western countries about their non-white counterparts. I mean, I know, having heard from some of the stories in hockey camps in this country about some coaches referring to, for example, the Pakistani team as coming from a poorer country, and therefore England or GB should wipe the floor with them. And at the end of the day, sport reflects society. And unfortunately, there are race equality issues in society, and it won't change overnight. And it definitely won't change unless we have sort of more diverse thinking from a top down and a bottom up.
No, absolutely. And I think the Olympics, given that it's meant to be this great opportunity to bring the world together in sport, Anyika, you've competed at the Olympics within the kind of bubble of the tournament. How are these issues addressed? Do you feel that other athletes have supported you in the past? How does it feel from the inside?
It's a tough one, because previously when I've competed at the Olympic Games, I'm extremely proud to be British, but there have been instances in the past where I haven't necessarily felt British. So we're all about unity and coming together and being as one. And I think that was the whole ethos and slogan with Team GB and the BOA, etc. But sometimes when you're a person of colour, you're not necessarily treated the same way. So when I've been outspoken about certain things to management in the past, when I've said things that have occurred and I've just been unhappy with it, sometimes I've been deemed the problematic one. I've been told, just kind of know your place. You should be grateful to be here. Just focus on the job. But that shouldn't necessarily be the case. And unfortunately, as well, the problem is when I've dealt with these issues, especially when it is to do with race and being told, oh, you're the aggressive one, it's always that horrible, awful trait that Black women have to put up with, like, are seen as the loud, aggressive type, which isn't necessarily the case. It's not even a case, rather. Like Gurmej was saying, is that because you've got the same people in the same positions for years, especially in my sport, you haven't necessarily had any change. So it's the same faces making the same decisions, and they don't realize, their decisions ultimately impact athletes like myself. The good thing is moving forward, so over the past year, because we have, like I was saying before, been so open about these discussions related to race and equality and diversity and all these different things, for the first time ever, British athletics have a team coach, head coach who is Black. And we've never had that before. And people always say, well, what's the significance? Like, why should it matter? Why should it be based on colour? When you've never been discriminated against in your life, like that's something that you would never ever understand. Like, you can go and apply for a job and you'll have all these credentials on your CV, but people won't necessarily see your colour. They wouldn't see you if you're non-Black, they won't see that. But when you're a Black person, unfortunately, I've been told, from when I was a young girl, I know a lot of Black people have been told, I know a lot of people of colour have been told, you always have to work twice as hard or 10 times as hard than your white counterparts. And unfortunately, that's just how it is in society. I want to see change. I do believe that change is coming. The likes of Christian Malcolm being in the position that he's in, alongside Darren Campbell, who's also head coach of the sprint relay team as well. It's starting to show that slowly we are starting to make changes. And then you see it filtering in other areas as well. You see people of colour moving into, sitting on the board, sitting within meetings, executive director positions. Like, these are the changes that ultimately impact how the sport is going to move forward. And that, I believe, is what we all want to see.
Absolutely. I think it's true that a lot of the discussions that happen around how things move forward in football as well, in terms of directors of football and people working at the top of football clubs as well. I think, Gurmej, it comes back to what you kind of raised the alarm on with hockey last year as well, because I know you're very passionate about the systematic issues of access, which cut across both class and race as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think sometimes people... we've been brought up to think of racism as being binary, that you're either racist and a really bad person, or non-racist and a good person. And racism is a lot deeper than that. There's interpersonal racism, which is, the slights that people might make towards you, or, for example, when I was growing up at school, getting called a paki. Or there's the institutional racism, which happens within the institutions. And then there's the structural racism. And when we talked about structural racism in hockey, there's the lack of facilities, for example, for young kids in inner cities. Like our club, Barford Tigers, we have kids who come to our training on scholarships, and they are free school meals kids. And to qualify for free school meals, your parents need to be earning under £7,000 a year. Now, I mean, I don't know how people can possibly live off that. But then you're asking these kids who might have a great talent to play hockey. And if they are talented and seem to go through the talent system, they might be asked to pay £90 to go to a talent centre, a regional or a national talent centre. And then when they get there, they roll up to this talent centre. Maybe someone's taken them to the England hockey camp, and they see all the fancy cars outside and all the supportive parents and the coaches who don't look like them or sound like them, and they feel excluded. There's no one there who kind of represents them and can talk to them on their level. And then, as Anyika said, if they say something that could be out of sorts, they could be made to feel like they're the troublemaker, and they don't feel part of the system. And this isn't an issue that is exclusive to hockey. I know it happens in other sports as well. And I think that's what people don't understand when we talk about the structure of discrimination.
Oh, absolutely. Anyika, is that reflected in athletics still as well, do you think?
As much as I would like to say, no, it doesn't. But yeah, I think it's definitely still ongoing. What I've noticed watching the Olympics, especially as an outsider, first of all, it's weird watching the games for the first time, especially when I've been to the last three. But secondly, watching it and kind of seeing the media coverage. First of all, you've got the language that's used with certain journalists. So it's like there's always been this thing that it's always kind of made me feel uncomfortable. And I'm going to use this as an example. So in my former events, for example, so you got the sprint, you got the 100 meters, 200 meters, and 100 meters especially is deemed as the blue ribbon event, with the likes of Bolt and, just how incredible he was as an athlete. But because most of the sprinters have always been Black, it seems that the media have always tried to paint this thing where when a white sprinter comes in and they're doing really, really well, they're making finals, potential medalists, they're deemed as the great white hope. Yeah. Whereas in other sports, when have you ever heard that? And the thing is, also, no one calls them out on it. Whereas the athletes have always constantly said, especially the Black athletes, like, no one ever says, oh, you've got the great Black hope in other sports. Since when has Lewis Hamilton been called the great Black hope ever? Given how dominant he's been in F1 for over 10, 12 years, it honestly doesn't make any sense. So there's kind of that. But again, because of the most of the media are white, they just feel like, oh, well, it's okay to use this language. It's deemed as okay, So there's that, which is obviously uncomfortable. And then you've got the whole conversation around the DSD athletes. So with you got Casa Semenya, who wasn't able to compete because they told her to take the medication. She refused. So she wasn't able to compete. As a DSD athlete, you're not able to compete in the 8 and the 4, the 8 and the 1500 meters. They said you do 5 or above or below 4, so 2 and 1 sprints. And so Casta didn't get the standard for the 5,000. Then you got 2 DSD athletes, I think from Namibia, I believe, who had been running exceptionally well in the 400 meters. And I was looking at these girls all summer and watching their performances. I was like, yes, they're ready to compete. But I know because of the internal pressures that's going on within World Athletics, they're going to pull the rug from these 2 girls and they're not going to give them the opportunity to compete in the 400, given the fact that everyone now knows they're classed as the DSD athletes. So then World Athletics then said, you're not allowed to compete in the 4, so you have to compete in the 2. So the 2 girls were like, okay, that's cool. So the IAAF the World Athletics and probably the IOC wasn't expecting these girls to run as quick as they did. And one of them got silver and she ran the world junior record 3 times, ran an African record. Like she just ran phenomenal. And then the other athlete as well finished 5th in the race. So there's just been all these question marks around it. And like, it just honestly feels like it's just constant levels of discrimination, especially against Black women in the sport. You've got, like Gurmej was saying about Alice, and the caps, and the fact that why has this only been brought up now? Why is this conversation happening on the eve of the Olympics? What, like, right into the Olympics? Why is this even a discussion? Because given the fact that the majority of swimmers are white, why is it being targeted towards the Black athletes? So, like I was saying, I'm glad that people are able to see what's going on, but it also tells a bigger part in how the media are also portraying these stories. You know what I mean? So yeah.
No, absolutely. I think, speaking from the media side, I think there are some cliches out there which need to be tackled and taken out of circulation, like pace and power, referring to athletes as beasts or monsters and stuff. I don't think it really is helpful or very fair at all. What I would say is, if anyone does have any questions who are watching the discussion, please do drop them into the chat below, and we will do our very best to pick some up, either during the discussion or at the end in the Q&A as well. But Anyika, you mentioned Euro 2020 as well, in the final, and the reaction to Rashford, Sancho and Saka there as well. Gurmej, as someone who's involved in a team sport, how is race kind of tied into how individuals are kind of picked out of those team situations, you think, and what was your reaction to what happened in the Euros?
I think I've heard so many people say this, that when the 3 lads missed the penalties, they knew exactly what was going to happen, and that was going to be that those 3 lads were going to get targeted online with some online abuse, which is obviously abhorrent. But then I also think back to some of the politicians before the the Euros, talking about the players taking the knee as being gesture politics, and that just really kind of, grated with me, because I just thought to myself, here's Priti Patel, who is the daughter of an immigrant, and she is in a position of power, and she's playing politics with this, and myself as a son of an immigrant, what I'd like to say to Priti Patel is that it's because people have taken a stand against racism in the years before, and they're continuing to do so now, that she's been able to get into the position that she's got into. So I thought that was an abhorrent comment from somebody in her position. Regardless of her race or her background, it was an abhorrent comment, and it kind of just stoked the flames, really. So was I surprised by what happened after the Euros, after they those three guys missed the penalties? No, I wasn't. And yeah, I think social media companies have got a responsibility to do more about this, but I think the general media and how they sort of portray players of all colours have got a role to play in that as well.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned the knee there. I think there's been an announcement that the Premier League clubs will continue taking the knee as a stand against racism for the forthcoming season. Anyika, there was that decision at the start of the Olympic Games that the broadcaster wasn't going to show images of that. Now, there's some iconic moments in the past, especially black athletes kind of standing on the pedestal and raising their fist very, very famously in the Olympics. What did you make of the reaction there to the official broadcaster not wanting to show those images, and eventually them caving and having a U-turn when pressure built on that decision?
Yeah, I actually saw some images of the athletes taking the knee. Not so much in, I don't think we've had it so much in track and field, but definitely in football. I saw some of the male and female footballers taking the knee, and even when it was on TV, I was like, oh, are they going to keep it on? Are they going to show it? Is this something that it's going to get taken off? But no, it needs to be shown, because people just think, oh, it's just happening in football. And so I know fans, right? I know how football fans are, unfortunately, especially after watching the demise of how they reacted to the Euros. But what annoys me is them saying they're sick and tired of seeing people taking the knee. Like, they're sick and tired of it. Like I was saying before, when you've never been discriminated against, you will never know what it's like to actually have an understanding of what it's like to just be a person of color, or someone who is just dealing with everyday racism. And that's what I was saying before as well about the need for allies. Like, it's important in terms of how it's shown in the media, having these conversations amongst friends, amongst family, amongst teammates. I always say Google is free. There's so many educational books out there. It's not for us to do the work, but it's for everyone to make sure that they are included in the conversation and to keep it going. So now that we know that the footballers are going to take the knee, continue to take the knee next season, that makes me happy. And the football fans will have to just deal with it. Like, let's just continue to just build momentum. Like, that's the only way that we're going to continue to see change and have an understanding of how it's not just going to be something we're going to do for a small bit of window for some activism, where no, it has to be ongoing in order to see change.
No, absolutely. I think that's a useful kind of segue to our next kind of talking point in the panel discussion, which is role models, really. And we'll stick with you, Anyika, because talking about the footballers and then taking the knee, I think they are inspirational figures, especially to a lot of young people. And I think we're probably seeing more of what we maybe saw in NBA and other sports coming through to footballers kind of taking certain responsibilities on themselves. I think Marcus Rashford and the free school meals is a great example of that. But who were your role models in sport growing up, and why were they important to you?
Oh, I have a lot. I have a few. So probably, well, given I'm being biased, so my sport was athletics. So growing up in the 90s, I loved seeing the likes of Linford Christie, Kelly Holmes. My biggest inspiration, I remember, was probably Denise Lewis. So seeing Denise Lewis perform at Sydney Olympics to win gold, I even remember watching, and when I was very, very young, I'm not going to say my age, but watching the Atlanta Olympics and when she got silver. So to see her when I was like 15, 16 to win gold in Sydney, that pretty much changed everything, because there's nothing wrong with being inspired by people who look like you.
Mm.
And the reason why I say that is because there was a moment when growing up in Liverpool, there's, it's multicultural, but, there are a lot of white people here. So growing up in Liverpool, when I trained at Wavertree, there weren't many black people, there weren't, many black athletes. But everyone was very warm and welcoming. I love training with so many different people. But I only really saw the effects when it came to identity and race when I came back to Liverpool, and I came back from Liverpool and I did a training session after the Rio Olympic Games. So the club, I came down with my medal as well. So the club were like, "Yeah, bring your medal down." I wasn't in Liverpool very often, just given my time and the schedule and stuff. So when the kids came and they saw the medal, they were like just in awe of it. But then when I was actually in the middle of my session, I saw this one little black girl watching me. And I remember my mom came down the track and this little girl ended up talking to my mom and was like picking her brain about me. And she was just like, "Oh, I'm just in awe of Anyika. I watched you in the Olympics. Like, I can't believe it." So what I ended up doing on my last rep, I think I did like 6 150s. I just said to her, "Let's go. Like, do you want to do the last 150 with me?" And she was like, "Oh, yeah, let's do it." And she spiked up. She got her spikes on, and I was like, "Okay, you lead us off." And she was, obviously she didn't beat me, but it was great for her. It was great for her. Like, I didn't realize in that moment just how impactful being an actual role model was. When I see young black girls sending me messages, being open about like racism and body image and, having to deal with, discrimination that I haven't been able to talk about before. But it also makes you realize you're in a position of power, because in order to see change, you have to have these girls look up to someone who's been in that position and just being a voice for the next generation. So again, going back to your original question, I was also inspired by, outside of athletics, the Williams sisters. So, Venus and Serena Williams just dominating tennis, being in a predominantly white sport as well, just being in awe of them. And again, these women had to face continuous discrimination. "Oh, you can't wear this. You can't wear the catsuit. You can't, you're getting fined for throwing your racket." It was just constantly ongoing with these things. Whereas when some of the white players have done it, definitely saw Djokovic lose his rag at the Olympic Games just last week when he threw his racket, but there was definitely no fine there. Whereas when it's Serena Williams or when it's a woman of colour, it's always a big deal. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it's important to have these role models, because unfortunately we do have a responsibility. But now we are in a position where we are able to freely speak up and have these conversations like we are right now.
No, absolutely. And now that you've stepped away from the track and you're a commentator on sport, and you've got your book coming out in March 2022 as well, what do you feel your role now is, as I guess, a role model who's retired from the track, but is still an important voice and kind of example to the next generation?
Yeah, I definitely just want to continue to just use my voice. I think when the book comes out next year, March 2022, people will have a better understanding of just the different things that I encountered. So yes, there will be some issues on race, but there'll be a whole other things that I dealt with, and I just never felt a position to speak about it. Like, I didn't necessarily feel protected in some spaces. I didn't necessarily feel safe as well. And also, like, your identity and your race also comes into play in that. In like, for example, how a white athlete is treated compared to a black athlete. So when I see young girls messaging me and telling me how they feel much more encouraged to speak out and have these open conversations, it honestly makes me happy. So I haven't got a choice whether I want to be a role model or not. I'll just continue to have my voice being heard.
No, absolutely. And Gurmej, who were your role models growing up in sport for yourself?
Oh man, like, you know, I used to like a lot of different sports. You know, from hockey, I mean, Imran Shawani from the 1988 Olympics, scoring the winning goals, he was like a role model. Then, you know, I looked at basketball, people like obviously Michael Jordan, Shaquille O'Neal, but, you know, Anyika was talking about the Williams sisters, and for me, they just represent progress, because let's face it, they don't have a typical story. Tennis is a very much a white, probably middle class dominated sport, and they've made a difference. Is what so many inner city kids believe that they can now be. And you know, I'm definitely not a role model for my lack of sporting achievements. But when I think about who I want my own kids to kind of look up to, I just want them to believe that they can be anything they want to be, and that their colour, and that the kids who come to our training on Sunday mornings at Barford Tigers, their colour and their race shouldn't be a prohibiting factor in their success in sport.
Absolutely. And who do you view as kind of your biggest allies, especially in the hockey world, to help make sport more inclusive? And what part do you think the media need to play in this area as well?
Yeah, so going back to last year when we looked at writing this letter to England Hockey, and there were a few clubs that I approached from around the country, especially some of the more ethnically diverse ones, because there's only a handful. And I thought that they would all kind of come together and want to do this. But what I was kind of hearing from a lot of them was that they didn't want to get involved. They were a bit scared of the backlash from England Hockey if they wrote this letter to them. And that kind of worried me a little bit, because I know even people within my own club wouldn't have liked me to have written that letter at that time. And then I thought that it would be mainly the sort of more ethnically diverse community who'd be sort of the allies. But, you know, I was really pleasantly surprised when, you know, I was getting people messaging me from around the country after the letter was published in The Guardian, from all backgrounds and all sorts of areas of the country, just saying they wanted to support the cause. And we kind of came up with this core group who said that, you know what, we want to be part of a movement here to make England Hockey listen and change the way that they're doing things. And the allies, I've got to say, like, just a massive thank you to the sort of core group of people who stuck with me from the start, really, in this challenge, because it is a challenge. It's not like a straight upward curve in progress, and there's a long way to go.
Absolutely. Anyika, in terms of allies that you've kind of helped you along the way, or that you look for support or for you know, solidarity at the moment, who do you think is playing the biggest part in making positive change happen in athletics now?
I think definitely, like I was saying before, having someone like Christian Malcolm as a black coach, and, you know, the likes of Darren Campbell, and even before them, Paula Dunn, who I have to give a big shout out to her, because she has really just been doing so much work behind the scenes. She, for example, whenever I had an issue with anything to do with race or discrimination, I felt like I always had to go to Paula. Paula Dunn is basically a black woman in power. She's head of the Paralympic team. But the problem is, Paula doesn't run the Olympic program. She doesn't manage or take care of the athletes who are you know, on the Olympic team, world champs. Her side is more Paralympic. My only saving grace is because I've known Paula since I was a junior athlete, and I have a really, really good relationship with her. Whereas before that wasn't necessarily the case. So that's why now we are starting to see changes, like bringing Christian Malcolm in, bringing Darren Campbell in, having other people within the organisation actually make space and just taking a step back. So you've got, like, I believe Louise Woodward stepped down from her position as the president of Team England, or the Commonwealth Games Federation, last year, because of everything that was, you know, that conversations that we're now having. So she was willing to, you know, take a step back and just say, you know, give my position to a person of colour. My only issue with that is, like, why should it be on Louise as a woman? You know, because everyone wants to tick this diversity box. and sometimes it's okay to have like a woman in position. But why should it be Louise? Why can't it be any of the other white men who are in? Like, how can you allow this woman to do this, to basically step down from her position? And my understanding was, from when I've met Louise, she always did a fantastic job. But why should it be on her? Who else is trying to be an ally aside from her? So you've got that situation. And then, going back to my sports, having these conversations like I did. So last year when we did have the whole, George Floyd murder, on callous murder that happened last year, a lot of the athletes that I was speaking to weren't training. They were not in a position to train. They'd already realized that Tokyo was going to be postponed, and their own federation were not having a discussion. But the medals come from the majority of Black athletes. So how are these people in power not having a conversation with the athletes who are hurting and suffering the most? They weren't interested in training. They were interested in protesting. They were interested in, unfortunately, watching the onslaught media, the news that was going on, seeing what was happening in Minneapolis, and, the riots. And, I felt for it. But so I had to actually make a phone call I had to send an email to Paula, who then put me in contact with the new CEO of British Athletics, to be like, okay, I'm retired, so this ain't on me, but you've got a duty of care for the athletes who are still trying to compete, who, you need to have these conversations. So now what we are seeing, and I don't think I really played a part in this. All I did was have a conversation. But now we are seeing within the sports, like, they have regular meetings, like virtually, like they have this whole let's talk about race. They have a diversity and inclusion network. They have a whole advocacy team, where this is going to be an ongoing conversation. And I believe they've also got a plan in place for the next 4 to 5 years, just to see change within positions of power. So not just Christian, not just Darren, but the people who do also work behind the scenes as well, because that's also been a big problem. So British Athletics have a duty of care. England Hockey, GB Hockey, they also have a duty of care, because we do want to see, other people step down from their positions, to just show us how much of an ally they really want to be.
Yeah, 100%. I think my kind of follow on from that, to both of you, we'll come to you, Anyika, first, is the flip side of it, in that, as you say, it's good that there's this kind of institutional kind of backing, as it were, coming up more so in athletics. But how much of a pressure is it on individuals to have to carry the fire and push for change, when really they're athletes, they just want to do their sport? This is a big load placed on people to tackle issues which, as Gurmej said, are societal issues just reflected in sport.
Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, it is on the athletes to have these conversations. Like I said, if you're a non-person of colour and you are able to wake up every day knowing that you're not going to get discriminated against, no one's going to call you, some racist remark, or you're not going to feel as though you're going to be discriminated against, even when they're in your presence, because sometimes it can be it's always the small things as well. You're walking into a room full of white people, and then they see you, or they look at your name and they go, "Oh, where are you from? No, where are you really from?" And I always tell people, "Oh, I'm from Smithtown, or I'm from Wavertree," and they're like, "Wait, well, where's that? No, where are you really from? No, where are you really, really from?" And it's like, you're not deemed British until, because you're not white, you're not, you don't have a British name or an English name, and it's just those small microaggressions. So unfortunately, it is for us to keep, having these conversations, and to just continue the conversation, in order to educate people.
We're going to come on to kind of actions that we'd like people to take on from this call, but just on that point specifically, because we've mentioned a couple of times now, people that obviously haven't experienced racism, what can they do to be better allies in what we're talking about here, to help carry the load, as it were, do you think, Anyika?
There's a laundry list. But there is. Sometimes it literally just starts with just stop having your head in the sand. Stop just thinking, oh, it'll go away. Like, you know, people get irritated. You see the fans in, I don't know, Formula One or football, and they just think, oh, yeah, let's just stop all that taking a knee now. It's Marxism. What is Marxism? You know, it's just stupid. But yeah, it's just it is about just simple education and just like I said, just being an ally. It goes as small as something like reading books or speaking to a person of color. If you were to ask me a question, it wouldn't necessarily be on me. I wouldn't necessarily cuss you out for asking me. But if you were to ask me about like my heritage or like my background or why I am ingrained the way I am, or why do you think that why did your parents tell you you had to work 10 times as hard than your white counterparts as a young girl? Well, why is that? Like, if you were to ask me simple questions, I wouldn't have a problem with that. The problem is what you do and how you receive that information. If you're one of those people who just feel yourself being attacked, then it's pointless. But I just feel like it can be simple as just Googling, it's just reading books, it's just, you know, sitting in on conversations, talking to people of color. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily object to that. I don't know how other people of color may feel, because it's tiring. It is tiring having to have these constant conversations. But we want allies. We want people to understand. We want to change the mindset of society, and the only way that we can do that is by educating ourselves in the process.
Definitely. And Gurmej, in terms of, I guess, what you've experienced in hockey, trying to kind of fight these battles as well, and you talked about the resistance or at least the lack of engagement with what you were kind of tackling there. How have you found that people have come round over the last year since you kind of went public with what you did? Have people had their eyes opened more, or are you still finding people that are resistant to it?
Yeah, I think you asked me earlier about the media, and I forgot to answer that. The media have a massive part to play in this, because if we keep having these conversations and keep recognizing that the problem hasn't gone away, then it actually puts pressure on the governing bodies to understand that they can't just brush the issues of the past and what's going on now under the carpet. And the media have a huge role to play in that. In terms of resistance, yeah, there's still resistance. I mean, I know that we've done some webinars where we've talked about different issues, some of them regarding race, and I think a lot of people still get quite defensive about that. They don't want to feel like they're being labeled as racist. It's that whole thing I was talking about before, that racism is kind of a binary thing, but it's not. This is about trying to help people understand that there are issues and how they can help be part of a solution. And I think as John and Amici always really eloquently puts it, it's not enough to say that you're not racist. You have to be anti-racist to actively go out of your way, say that, look, this isn't good enough, this needs to change, and this is what we can do to make it better.
Completely. And just to kind of follow on from that point, to move on to our next talking point, really, I think a lot of this also comes down to leadership, and both in terms of what you talked about, Anyika, and also your work in hockey as well, Gurmej. But according to Sport England, by 2051, over a third, or 38%, of sports participants in the UK will be Black, Asian, and of other ethnic backgrounds. However, people from minority ethnic backgrounds are currently underrepresented on sports boards, the media as well. They're also less likely to volunteer in sport or be even represented in sports media as well. And that reduces the talent pool for athletes and for diverse leaders for tomorrow. So both in terms of your work with Hockey All In and also as a chairman of a hockey club, Gurmej, what do you think could and should be done about this to make sure that the next generation are going to have the diverse leaders that maybe we've lacked in the past?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I think I'd really like to understand how Sport England came to those stats and where they've got them from. But I think you need to have a plan to ensure that there's sort of equality of access to facilities and training, and just make the cost of entry for sport have a low sort of baseline, especially in sports like hockey, where it doesn't have to be really, really expensive to start. And I think like the example that I gave earlier of having to pay £90 to go to national trials. I mean, only a small subsection of society are going to be able to afford that. And the funders of who fund the Sport England and who funds the athletes for the Olympics could argue that in the last 20 years that what they've done has been a success in the respect of GB have improved their medal tally over the last few years, and Anyika could tell you that. But at the same time, if we look at some of the legacy issues, we've still got child poverty, we've got an obesity problem in the country. So if it's not trickling down to the ground level and kids aren't getting the opportunities just to be fit and healthy and active because the environment they live in doesn't sort of promote that and they're getting into gang violence instead, then we've still got a problem. Sport can change people's lives. It can give people so many other opportunities. It can give them confidence to go on and not just become sort of top athletes, but to make something of their lives as well, just in a career sense, and stop them going down the route of getting into gangs. And you were mentioning about the volunteers as well. I look at sort of out of the Sikh community. The Sikh community has something called seva, which means service to your community, and people often do things that resonate with them. So when I look at the Sikh community, they do a lot in their local temples, or they do a lot to feed the homeless in their local area. But I don't necessarily see people from our community or the Sikh community going out and volunteering at a tennis match or volunteering at hockey, because it doesn't resonate with them, because their kids in their local area aren't playing it. So you're not going to volunteer if you don't feel that it resonates with you and your local community.
And I think we see that as well in I guess the quite surprising lack of British Asian talent breaking through into professional football as well, because given the size of the communities in England especially, you would expect there would be more British Asian professional footballers, really. And I think we've done articles in the past looking at that, and it often seems that there are kind of like community efforts to kind of get players through and getting involved, but it's so disjointed with the wider kind of talent paths into football. I guess, Anyika, in terms of athletics, you've talked about the progress we've seen with greater diversity and leadership of late. Do you think there's anything other sport organisations, other sports could learn from athletics?
Yeah, there's so much work to be done. Just going back to what Gurmej was saying, because he was making some really, really good points. And one of the things he says, which highlighted pretty much what I'm trying to explain, is accessibility and feasibility. So when you're in communities where they are in a predominantly Black and Asian community, and sometimes some people don't have that much money in the family household. Thankfully, I did what was considered a working class sport, but I also had a love affair when I was a kid for tennis, watching Serena Williams and Venus Williams, growing up. And, thankfully, Wavertree Athletic Centre is next door to the tennis centre. And when I wasn't training on the track, I would literally just go to the tennis centre next door and just watch. I wouldn't necessarily play, but I would just watch. But then when you look at the people around you, it didn't make me feel comfortable, because people, again, they don't look like you. And when you're a young girl coming up in sport, you're already dealing with identity issues because you don't see people on the track who look like you on a daily basis. But then in tennis, it's even worse. So yeah, I would just love to see change within these different organisations, UK Sport, Sport England, all these other sports, about what are you doing? What are you doing to go into communities and, setting up these different initiatives? Someone who's doing something fantastic, actually, within Liverpool is Tasha Jonas, so GB boxer, and her cousin, Nikita Jonas, I think, who's an England football player. So they are encouraging, they set up this initiative where they have like summer camps within boxing, within football. They're not just encouraging kids to just play football, they're encouraging girls, they're encouraging Black and Asian girls to just, participate in this week of, sport. And, I didn't necessarily have that growing up in Liverpool. So the fact that Natasha and Nikita have these initiatives in place, and they're going into these small communities and doing it. Is that something that maybe Liverpool Football Club or Everton have considered in the past? I don't know, but that's why it's also important to have role models. And then the other thing I wanted to add as well is in terms of increasing accessibility for other minorities within sport. The biggest example that I've seen so far, especially watching the Olympics, is seeing the amazing achievements of Kai White and Emily Campbell. So Kai White won Olympic silver in the BMX, and Emily Campbell also won silver in the weightlifting, so women's weightlifting. Two people of colour in what are considered minority sports. Also, to add, side notes, I wrote about this in my article that's going to drop tomorrow. So I think these two people in particular are amazing role models because they are not from track, they're not from cycling, like GB cycling, they're not from swimming, they're not from where the medals are coming from. They also have stories like Kai. He trains at a cycling track that was built in Peckham. He's now dubbed the King or Prince of Peckham. Peckham, which has got majority Black and Asian people within the community. And you've got now this kid who's now come back and he's won an Olympic medal. Like how unheard of is that? So it's just about setting these foundations and having them in place, but also utilizing these people, the likes of Emily, first female weightlifter to get a medal for GB since forever, and for weightlifting since 1984. They're making having these historic moments within their respective sports. So the next step I would love to see is these organizations actually saying, okay, we want to utilize you, we want to do this, we want these people are role models. Otherwise, if you don't, it's just going to be a waste of an opportunity, in my opinion.
I mean, it's wonderful that people are kind of becoming those role models for their community and going back and starting initiatives. But I guess it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of that is still quite a heavy load on people to bear, and they might do it willingly because they want to see change. But to bring us to our last point, if the people watching this discussion and watching the video, if you could pick one action point that they themselves could take from this event today and bring into their lives to help address these issues, so it isn't just falling on the kind of individual heroism of the athletes to kind of do it themselves, what would that action point be and why, Anyika?
I would probably say, look at what you've done in the past. So if you're a journalist, for example, look at something as simple as the language you've used when it comes to describing maybe a person of colour within sport and how that may have looked in the past. And now that me and Gurmej have given you this information, how are you going to use this moving forward? Is this something that you're actually going to change? Are you going to make yourself actively aware of this? Are you going to continue to be an ally? Are you going to just sit there and just go, no, I've posted my black square, over a year ago, and that's as much as I want to do? No, because that's what people were doing. Yeah. People were posting the black squares. I even know brands who were posting the black squares, and then within 48 hours they were deleting them, and they were using these ridiculous excuses saying like, oh, it doesn't look good on our social media feeds, and we just don't believe in that, we're all one, and just coming up with the most ridiculous excuses. So I hope everyone who's watching and who's listening is able to take on board everything that me and Gurmej have said, because these little small ideas and, again, speaking from experience as a Black woman in sport, is going to help sports media move forward, but also create a bigger landscape and having these ongoing conversations.
Yeah, brilliant. I guess same question for you as well, Gurmej. If there was an action point that you'd like the viewers to take away and put into their own lives to help address some of the issues raised today, what would it be and why for you?
Yeah, I think I agree with Anyika. Like, going back to what I said before, ask yourself, are you an anti-racist? And the second thing would be that don't just criticize. And when I talk about criticize, don't just put your black square on your Instagram or your Twitter. Contribute as well. what can you do to contribute to improving the situation? And sometimes to do that, you have to take yourself out of the comfort zone. You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes. Could that be, going to visit a different community to your own? Could it be doing that from your own bedroom or even from your office? Because, if COVID's taught us anything, that we can have chats and learn from people from around the world at a touch of a button. And there's a great what's it called now? Great app now called Lunch Club, where you subscribe every week to have a meeting with somebody sitting anywhere in the world, and you can just have a chat with them about anything for 30 minutes. I just think that's a great way to just learn about people from different parts of the world and understand that essentially we are all the same, but we just do things in a different way. We all want the same things. We all want to have a roof over our heads. We all want to be healthy and we all want to be happy. But the way that we get there might be slightly different.
I think I'd add to that as well, because I think I've read Sapiens. There's also the sequel, I think Homo Deus. So that's another one to whack on the list as well. So no, all really good shouts there. And thank you both for your time today. I think it's been a really illuminating chat with some really valuable experiences shared and some insights as well. So do you guys, a very last kind of minute or so, do you want to plug your social media platforms and tell people where they can find you? Anyika, do you want to go first?
Yes. So I am on, where have I just gone brain dead? I'm on Twitter, Twitter at Anyika Onuora. So ANNYONUORA. Instagram at Anyika, ANYIKA. And yeah, just look out for my hidden race coming out next year.
Brilliant. Gurmej?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn just as Gurmej, I think. Or you can find me as Gurmej Singh Pawar. Twitter, Gurmej SP. That's GURMEJ SP. And Instagram, events_Gurmej, GURMEJ.
Superb. Well, once again, thank you for your time. Really fascinating chat with both of you. And yeah, we're going to send around an email to all the attendees. Like I said, we'll try and include that reading list as well. But thank you for joining us. And hopefully see you at another event soon.